Welcome back to Terrified Tales, where the rain falls slow and the fear creeps in quicker. Like and subscribe before we begin, and tell us where and when you're listening. Midnight? Alone? That's when they find you. The wind howled through the empty streets of the small town as Lucas pulled his car into the narrow driveway. The rain had been relentless all evening, hammering the windshield like an unrelenting percussion. His headlights illuminated the crumbling structure ahead, a house that seemed more a relic of the past than a place of refuge. The Whisper House, as it was known, stood on the edge of town, a fading monument to something long forgotten. Lucas had heard the stories. Everyone in town spoke of it in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact, as if the very mention of the house could summon something terrible. But Lucas didn't believe in ghosts, curses, or haunted houses. He only believed in a fresh start, a chance to leave behind the wreckage of his past. He was an architect who had lost everything after a failed project, a scandal that left his name tarnished and his reputation shattered. A new town, a new house, and a new beginning. That's all he needed. The price of the Whisper House was too good to pass up. It was abandoned, weather-worn, and forsaken. Exactly what he needed to disappear from the world for a while. He stepped out of his car, the wet pavement sucking at his shoes, his jacket heavy from the rain. The house loomed over him, its windows like hollow eyes, its stone facade worn down by years of neglect. Ivy crept up the walls, covering much of the building in a thick green veil, making it look more like a part of the landscape than a human creation. Its roof sagged in places, and the front door, though not locked, looked as if it hadn't been opened in years. Lucas glanced at the small, weathered sign that hung by the front gate. For sale. It felt more like a warning, but he didn't mind. He had already made up his mind. This house would be his sanctuary, his retreat from the world that had left him behind. He didn't care about the rumors. He grabbed his suitcase from the trunk and walked up the crooked path to the front door. The wooden steps creaked under his weight, and the door swung open with a soft groan, revealing a dark, musty hallway inside. The air smelled stale, thick with dust, and the floorboards groaned in protest with each step he took. But it was perfect. The house had character. It had potential. Maybe, just maybe, he could turn it into something beautiful again. He closed the door behind him, leaving the storm and the world outside. The silence inside the house was profound, unnaturally still. As he made his way through the entrance hall, Lucas could feel a strange tension in the air, an almost palpable weight pressing down on him, but he didn't let it bother him. It was just the isolation, he told himself, just the unfamiliarity of being in a new place. His eyes landed on the staircase that led up to the second floor. The walls here were bare, but there was something oddly unsettling about the narrow hallway at the top. He couldn't quite place it, but it felt like the house was watching him, observing his every move. He shook his head and dropped his suitcase by the old wooden banister. The house was just old, that was all. Lucas took a deep breath, releasing the tension in his shoulders. It was time to unpack, to settle in, and let this house become his home. The storm outside only added to the feeling of detachment. It was just him now, alone in the vastness of the Whisper House. As he moved deeper into the house, he noticed something curious: soft whispers. At first, they were so faint that Lucas thought they were nothing more than the wind slipping through cracks in the walls. But as he passed from room to room, the whispers grew more distinct, more focused, as though they were deliberately calling to him. He froze, standing still in the center of the old sitting room. The whispers felt deliberate, like a presence lingering just out of sight. His skin prickled, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He turned toward the windows, half expecting to see someone standing outside, watching him. But no one was there. "Help me," the voice seemed to say. It wasn't clear, just a soft murmur, barely audible over the sound of the rain. Lucas dismissed it as his imagination running wild. He hadn't slept properly in days, but even as he set his things down in the corner and began to unpack, the whispers lingered in his mind, growing louder, more persistent. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't his imagination. Something in this house was trying to reach him. Yet as he settled into the room, unpacking his few belongings, Lucas couldn't help but feel a sense of calm wash over him. This was where he belonged now. It was just an old house with a few odd noises. Nothing more. The next morning, Lucas awoke to the sound of the rain still tapping lightly on the window pane, a soft, rhythmic reminder of the night that had passed. The house felt different now, quieter in the daylight, as though it had taken on a new, less threatening nature in the light of day. He stepped out of bed, his feet cold against the wooden floor, and made his way to the kitchen to brew a pot of coffee. The storm outside had subsided, but the air was still thick with moisture, making the house feel even more ancient. Lucas stood by the window, gazing out at the overgrown yard, his mind wandering as the steam rose from his mug. The house had a strange charm. Its creaky floorboards and dust-laden furniture gave it a sense of history, a life that existed long before he stepped inside. But the whispers, the voices that had whispered through the walls last night, kept circling in his mind. As he took another sip of coffee, he noticed something odd. The temperature in the room had dropped suddenly. A chill spread across his skin, like a draft had slipped through the cracks of the walls. But the windows were shut tight, and the air outside was warm now, the rain having ceased. He rubbed his arms to ward off the sudden coldness, but it lingered, wrapping itself around him like a heavy cloak. Just as he was about to dismiss it as a trick of his imagination, the whispers returned, this time louder and clearer than before. "Help me, Lucas!" He nearly dropped his coffee. His heart hammered in his chest as his mind raced. The voice was unmistakable, though still faint, echoing from somewhere deep within the house. He set the mug down on the counter and moved cautiously toward the hallway. The house felt vast and sprawling, its old walls creaking with the weight of age and time. There was something in the air now, an electric tension, as though the walls themselves were alive, waiting for him to take the next step. He walked slowly down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. The whispers followed, like shadows trailing his every movement. He couldn't tell if the sound was coming from the walls themselves or if his mind was playing tricks on him, but he felt certain that it was not his imagination. The sound seemed to be leading him. He followed the whispers down the corridor, his pulse quickening with every step. They grew louder, more insistent, as if urging him to find something. "Help me! It's here. You have to find it." Lucas stopped in front of an old wooden door, one that he hadn't noticed the night before. It was half open, its paint chipped and peeling, and a dark stain marred the floor beneath it. He had walked by it earlier, but it hadn't caught his attention then. Now, however, it seemed to call to him. With a hesitant breath, Lucas pushed the door open. Inside was a small room, its walls lined with shelves, some of which were piled high with old books and strange objects. There was a small desk in the center of the room, covered in papers that had yellowed with age. But it wasn't the room itself that drew his attention. It was something else, a single framed portrait hanging crookedly on the wall. It was the same woman from the portrait in the attic. Her eyes, dark and deep, seemed to follow him as he stepped into the room. The portrait was of a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing, with an expression of sadness that sent a chill racing down his spine. She looked almost too real, as if she were waiting for him to speak, to ask her something. Her lips, though painted, seemed to tremble with the faintest motion, like they might form words if he listened closely enough. He stepped forward, drawn to the portrait, his fingers trembling as he reached out to touch the frame. The moment his fingers brushed against the glass, a sharp, painful coldness shot through his hand, and the whispers exploded into a frenzy. They filled the room, bouncing off the walls, as though the house was closing in around him. "Find her," the voice urged. "She's waiting. You must help her." Lucas staggered back, shaking his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His mind swirled with confusion, the lines between reality and some unseen force blurring. His eyes flickered back to the portrait, and for a moment he could have sworn he saw the woman's eyes shift, as though she was alive, watching him. The whispers continued, relentless and growing louder. Lucas clenched his fists and stepped back into the hallway, his mind racing. Who was this woman? Why did her portrait seem to speak to him, urging him to do something? He turned away from the room, his heart thudding in his chest. The house, which had seemed like nothing more than an abandoned relic just days before, now felt alive with a strange energy. He could feel the walls pressing in, as if the house itself was waiting for him to uncover something hidden, something he wasn't ready to face. But the whispers were clear. They weren't going to stop. They wanted him to listen. The following days blurred together in a haze of confusion and restless nights. Despite the unsettling experiences, Lucas found himself drawn back to the house each day, unable to shake the feeling that something more awaited him within its walls. The whispers never ceased. They came in fragments, snatches of pleading voices and cryptic messages that seemed to guide him deeper into the house's forgotten corners. The more he heard, the more obsessed he became with uncovering the source of these voices, the mystery of the woman in the portrait, and the house's strange history. Each night, the whispers led him through different parts of the house. They guided him down hallways he hadn't explored before, through rooms that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking, and sometimes even into areas that didn't seem to exist in the blueprints. He began to lose track of time, his routine consumed by his search. Each new discovery only deepened his obsession. It was as though the house itself was testing him, drawing him closer to its dark secrets. On the fourth night, Lucas sat in the dimly lit study, flicking through dusty books, trying to find anything that might shed light on the house's history. His fingers lingered on an old leather-bound tome, its cover cracked and worn. The title faded almost beyond recognition. As he opened it, a thick layer of dust puffed into the air, and his eyes were immediately drawn to a chapter on the house's original owner, a woman named Evelyn Wells, who had mysteriously vanished almost 40 years ago. The mention of her name sent a jolt through him, and for the first time he realized the connection between her and the woman in the portrait. The journal entries and books in the study told of a woman who had lived in the house alone, battling a growing sense of paranoia and fear. According to the entries, she was obsessed with the house, much like he had become. As her isolation deepened, Evelyn began to hear voices from within the walls, much like Lucas did now. Her journal was filled with cryptic descriptions of strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, windows that opened without explanation, and the sound of footsteps following her in empty rooms. But the most disturbing part of her writing was the warning that had come at the very end of the journal. "The house knows you. It will take you when you are ready." The words chilled him, a cold wave of dread washing over him as he realized the same forces that had tormented Evelyn were now reaching out to him. Unable to stop himself, Lucas spent the next day combing through every inch of the house. He ventured into places he had previously avoided. The narrow attic, the dark cellar, the hidden corners where the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. He discovered old trunks filled with Evelyn's belongings, letters, photographs, and old clothes. The closer he looked, the more he felt as though he was uncovering pieces of her life, a life that had been swallowed by the house long before he arrived. But it was more than just the objects that intrigued him. It was the feeling of presence, the sensation that Evelyn's energy still lingered, waiting for him to understand. By now, the whispers were no longer subtle. They were insistent, demanding. They would wake him in the dead of night, tugging him out of his bed, pulling him toward the rooms he had not yet explored. Each night, he would follow the whispers further, and with each passing hour, the house seemed to reshape itself, revealing hidden rooms, peeling wallpaper, and forgotten corners filled with old relics. The further he ventured, the more restless the house became, as though it too were anticipating something. But there was something else, something darker, that began to gnaw at his mind. Every time he thought he had discovered all there was to know, the house revealed more. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, and the floorboards creaked with every step he took. It wasn't just the house that was changing, it was him. He felt as though the house was feeding on his very soul, drawing him in with its mysteries and secrets. The longer he stayed, the more entangled he became in the house's web. On the seventh day, Lucas found something in the cellar, a locked door that had been hidden behind a pile of old furniture. The moment he unlocked it, a wave of cold air rushed past him, as if the room beyond had been sealed for years. Inside, there was nothing but darkness. But as Lucas stepped forward, his eyes slowly adjusted to the dim light, and he saw what lay within. At the center of the room was a large old mirror, its frame carved with intricate patterns that seemed to shimmer in the faint light. The mirror was cracked in several places, but despite the imperfections, it seemed to reflect the room in unnerving detail, as though it was showing him a reality just beyond his own. He felt a chill crawl up his spine as he stepped closer to the glass. His reflection was distorted, but it wasn't just the cracks that made it strange. In the reflection, standing behind him, was Evelyn. Her eyes were wide, pleading, her face twisted in fear. Lucas spun around, heart hammering in his chest, but no one was there. He turned back to the mirror and she was gone. The whispers echoed in his ears once more, this time louder than ever, as though they were coming from the mirror itself. Find her. She's waiting. You must listen. Lucas's obsession grew stronger with each passing day. The house had become an extension of himself, its walls pressing against him, its very air vibrating with secrets that he felt compelled to uncover. The mirror, with its unsettling reflection of Evelyn, remained etched in his mind. Her eyes, wide with terror, haunted him. What had she known? What had she seen before her disappearance? What had this house done to her, and now to him? Determined to learn more, Lucas returned to the study. He scoured the dusty shelves for any further clues about Evelyn's life. Books on architecture, forgotten journals, and stacks of old letters were scattered across the room, their spines faded and brittle with age. He opened each journal he could find, hoping to stumble upon something more that would make sense of the twisted feeling creeping into his chest. Finally, beneath a pile of unremarkable papers, he found it. It was a small leather-bound journal, its cover cracked, but the pages still intact. Unlike the others he had looked through, this one felt different, heavier, almost as if it were alive. The first few pages were filled with sketches of the house's floor plan, detailing rooms that had long since vanished. Some areas were marked with strange symbols, circles, and jagged lines, while others were merely blank, as if Evelyn had been trying to map something hidden from view. As Lucas turned the pages, he found more than he had hoped for. A record of Evelyn's gradual descent into madness. Her handwriting was erratic, sometimes elegant and controlled, other times frantic and desperate. She wrote about the house's changing nature, about rooms shifting, walls breathing, and the floorboards groaning with unseen movement. But it was the later entries that gripped him. They spoke of something darker, a presence in the house, one that was far more than just a haunting. It was as if the house itself was a living entity, feeding on her fear, trapping her mind within its walls. It calls to me, one entry read. The house has become my friend, my lover, my prison. I hear it at night, whispering my name, urging me to listen. It promises that I will never be alone, but at what cost? As Lucas read, a sense of dread began to creep up his spine. Evelyn had started to believe that the house had a consciousness, a will of its own, and that it was intent on making her its prisoner. He turned the pages with growing urgency, his hands trembling. The last entry was a single sentence: "I have seen its face." The words were scrawled in large, frantic letters, as though Evelyn had been writing in a frenzy. Lucas felt a shiver run down his spine as he stared at the page. What had she seen? What was it about this house that had broken her so completely? Desperation gnawed at him. He had to know more. He could feel the house pressing in on him, its whispering walls urging him onward. He had to follow the trail. His fingers numbly turned the page, and at the very back of the journal, he found a map, a crude sketch of the house's floor plan. But this time, it was different. The layout was more complex than any he had seen before, filled with hidden rooms and passages that shouldn't have existed. The attic was marked with a large red X. Below the floorboards, there was a space marked Vault. The map was incomplete, as if Evelyn had never finished her work, but it was enough to send a chill through Lucas. He had to find the vault. Lucas felt the same pull, the same hunger he had felt the moment he stepped foot in the house. The whispers, though faint, grew louder in his mind, urging him to uncover whatever it was that Evelyn had left behind. He knew that the only way to make sense of what was happening to him was to follow the journal's clues, to find the vault, to find whatever had been hidden away by Evelyn, whatever dark secret the house had kept for so many years. And so that night he set out again, more determined than ever. He traced the map through the house, carefully following the lines, the markings, and the cryptic symbols. The deeper he went into the house, the more he could feel it. An overwhelming presence, like an electric charge building in the walls. The air was thick with something oppressive, a weight that threatened to crush him as he moved further into the forgotten corners of the house. At one point, Lucas stopped in front of a narrow, crooked door that led to a staircase descending into the dark. The map had directed him here, though he hadn't noticed the door before. It had been concealed behind a heavy curtain, tucked away in a small corner of the hallway. The door's handle was cold to the touch, and as he turned it, a rush of cold air poured out, as though the room had been sealed for centuries. His heart pounded in his chest as he descended the staircase. The air grew colder, thick with dust, and the smell of decay. The steps creaked under his weight, the sound echoing in the silence that surrounded him. At the bottom of the stairs, he found a low door, barely large enough for him to fit through. His breath quickened, and a sense of foreboding settled deep in his bones. With a trembling hand, Lucas pushed the door open. Inside, the room was shrouded in darkness. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw it at the far end of the room, an altar-like structure. It was made of stone, worn and cracked with age, and there were strange symbols carved into the surface. Around the altar, the floor was scattered with broken glass, discarded objects, and what looked like old ritualistic remnants. And there, in the dim light, was a photograph. A photograph of Evelyn, standing in front of the altar, her face twisted. In terror, she had found this place. She had discovered whatever secret the house had been hiding. The whispers grew louder, urging Lucas forward. He could feel it. The house was watching, waiting for him to understand. The room was cold, unnaturally cold. Lucas stood frozen, the weight of what he had discovered pressing down on him. The altar loomed before him, its stone surface cracked and worn, as though it had been used for something long forgotten. The air was thick with an ancient, musty scent, the kind that only decades of neglect could produce. Yet, beneath the smell of decay, there was something else. A faint, pungent undercurrent that made his skin crawl. The photograph of Evelyn remained in his hands, Her face, captured in the moment before something unimaginable had taken place, stared back at him, her eyes wide and full of fear. She had been standing in front of this very altar, possibly performing whatever dark ritual she had been consumed by. What had she uncovered here? What had she awakened? The whispers surged, louder now, as if they were emanating directly from the altar itself. She found it. You will too. The words were clear, chilling. Lucas dropped the photograph, his hands shaking. He took a step back, the realization slowly sinking in. Evelyn hadn't simply vanished. She had been consumed, absorbed into this place, just as he felt himself being pulled deeper into the house's cold embrace. Shaking off his horror, Lucas turned away from the altar and surveyed the room. It was unlike any space he had encountered in the house before. Its proportions were wrong. The walls seemed to curve inward, and the ceiling appeared to be lower than it should have been. Something felt off, out of place. The space wasn't just decaying. It was alive, breathing, shifting beneath his feet. He reached for the door to exit, but as his hand touched the handle, he heard it, a low, guttural groan that reverberated through the floorboards. The walls creaked, and suddenly, Lucas realized that the room around him was moving. The walls, which had seemed so firm and immovable moments before, were shifting, slowly at first, then with increasing speed, as if the house itself was twisting, warping, and changing its shape. Panic gripped his chest. The entire house was alive, and it was moving in ways he couldn't understand. He turned back to the altar, his mind racing. He needed to leave, needed to escape, but the door wouldn't open. His fingers were numb, trembling as he tried again. And then, as if the house had heard his thoughts, the door suddenly slammed shut, trapping him inside. The sound was deafening, like a clap of thunder that rattled the very bones of the building. The room continued to shift. The walls seemed to bend and flex as though they were made of something organic, something far more sinister than stone or wood. The air became thicker, the shadows stretching unnaturally, as though the house was reaching out for him. Lucas stumbled backward, his heart racing, his breath shallow. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, as though the house was feeding on his fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. "She's coming. She's waiting." The voice echoed in his ears, the words stretching like a dark promise. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack from the corner of the room, and Lucas's eyes darted toward it. The floorboards were splintering, slowly peeling back as if the very foundation of the house were being unmade. He watched in horror as the walls shifted further, twisting like a living thing, revealing something hidden beneath. A doorway. The door, once sealed off by time and decay, was now wide open, its edges flickering like a mirage. It beckoned to him, and Lucas felt an unnatural pull toward it. The whispers were deafening now, a torrent of voices filling the room, filling his mind. Go to her. Without thinking, driven by an overwhelming compulsion, Lucas moved toward the doorway. The closer he got, the more intense the pull became, and he found himself stepping through the threshold. The room beyond was nothing like the one he had just left. This new space seemed ancient, untouched by time. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and mildew. A single light, faint but steady, flickered above him. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw it, a small stone well at the center of the room, its edges worn smooth by centuries of neglect. Around the well, the walls were covered in symbols, the same cryptic marks he had seen in Evelyn's journal. They glowed faintly, a dull, sickly green, as if they were alive. Just like the house. Lucas approached the well, his breath tight in his chest. The whispers seemed to come from all around him now, swirling like a storm, each voice pushing him toward the well, toward whatever lay beneath. He looked down into the well, expecting to see only darkness. But there, in the depths, something shimmered, a faint, otherworldly glow. The air around him grew even colder, and the whispers reached a fever pitch, as though the house was urging him to jump, to descend into the unknown. She did it. She found the way. Lucas didn't know why, but the compulsion was too strong. To resist, he reached down, his fingers trembling, and touched the edge of the well. In an instant, the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The entire room tilted, the walls warping, the symbols glowing brighter, and then, as if the house had been holding its breath, the floor collapsed. Lucas fell, plummeting into the darkness, the house's eerie whispers drowning out his screams. As the walls closed in around him and the world above him vanished, Lucas's fall seemed endless, as if the very foundations of the house were pulling him into its depths, dragging him toward a place beyond the physical world. His body twisted and jerked through the dark air, but it felt like more than just a fall. The walls, the ceiling, the ground, everything was shifting, as though the house itself had become a living labyrinth, eager to consume him. Then, just as suddenly as the fall had begun, the ground beneath him solidified. Lucas slammed into a cold, hard surface. His head rang with the impact, his vision spinning as he struggled to catch his breath. The space around him was dark, suffocatingly so, but there was something else, an odd, almost comforting hum that resonated deep in his chest. The walls here seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, faint light flickering in the distance. For a long moment, Lucas lay motionless, his mind spinning. He tried to push himself up, his body aching, but as he struggled to stand, a faint light caught his attention. Through the thick shadows he saw it, a large cracked mirror standing in the far corner of the room. He felt an unsettling pull toward it. The mirror was unlike any he had seen before. Its frame was elaborate, a heavy wooden structure adorned with intricate carvings. But the cracks in the glass seemed to shift with a life of their own, as though they were constantly moving, rearranging, like spider webs in the wind. As Lucas stepped closer, the air around him grew thicker. His heart pounded in his chest, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he hesitated. Something about this mirror felt wrong. It didn't just reflect what was in front of it. No, it was as though it could see through him, into something deeper. The whispers from the house were louder now, more frantic. They swirled in his mind like a storm, drowning out all thought but one: look into the mirror. He moved forward, his legs unsteady, his breath shallow. The closer he got, the more intense the sensation became, as though the house was pressing in around him, urging him to step forward. And so he did. Lucas stared into the mirror, expecting to see his own reflection. But what he saw was not just him. For a moment, everything was normal. His own face, worn and tired, staring back at him from the glass. But then, something began to shift. His reflection grew distorted, its edges blurring and stretching. His own features twisted and pulled, becoming unnaturally elongated. And then he saw it. Behind him in the mirror stood a figure, a woman. She was watching him, standing motionless in the reflection. It was Evelyn. Her face, pale and gaunt, stared back at him with hollow, empty eyes. She was dressed in the same clothes as in the photograph, the same expression of terror, frozen on her face. But now, in the mirror, her lips began to move, though no sound came from her mouth. "Help me," she whispered, her voice a soft, agonizing plea. Lucas took a step back, his pulse racing, his breath caught in his throat. This isn't real. This isn't happening. But the figure in the mirror didn't fade. It only grew clearer, more defined. Evelyn's form was now more than just a reflection. It was solid, as if she existed. In both the mirror and in the space behind him, the whispers became a deafening roar, a cacophony of voices. "She's trapped here. She never left," they hissed, their urgency mounting. "You must join her." Lucas turned around quickly, but the room was empty, just as it had been a moment ago. The mirror, however, still reflected Evelyn, standing in the same position, her eyes wide and desperate. "Find her," the voice in his mind urged. "She knows the truth. You have to listen. She will show you the way." Lucas felt his body tremble as the weight of the house's presence pressed down on him. He had felt this before, the sensation that the house was aware of him, that it was watching, waiting for him to make the next move. He was no longer just an observer in this place. He was part of it now, a piece in a dark puzzle that had been laid out for him long before his arrival. He turned back to the mirror, staring into the haunting, vacant eyes of Evelyn. Her expression was locked in a silent scream. And then, slowly, the figure raised her hand and pointed directly at him. "Come closer," the voice whispered in his mind, no longer just an echo, but a command. Against his better judgment, Lucas took a step toward the mirror. The glass rippled like water as he neared, the surface warping and distorting under his hand. He reached out, his fingers trembling. He could feel the coldness radiating from the glass, but as his fingers made contact, something else happened. A jolt of electricity shot through him, searing through his body. His vision went white, and he stumbled back, his mind overwhelmed with sensations too alien to comprehend. Suddenly, everything went still. The mirror's surface smoothed, its cracks disappearing. Evelyn's form remained, but now she was different. Her expression was no longer one of terror. She smiled faintly, the corners of her lips curling upward, as if she were welcoming him into the depths of the house. The reflection no longer felt like a reflection at all. And then Lucas realized with a sharp, horrifying clarity, the house wasn't just alive, it was feeding on him. It wanted him. And Evelyn had become a part of it, trapped between the physical world and whatever dark realm the house had opened. The mirror wasn't showing him a reflection. It was a gateway, a passage, and now he was being drawn toward it. Two whispers surged once more, deafening in his ears. "Join her. Come closer." Without thinking, Lucas took one final step forward. Still here, brave. Or maybe you just like the feeling of being watched. Like, subscribe and drop your time and location in the comments, so we know who's still out there. Now breathe slow. The worst is coming. Lucas had crossed the threshold, or rather, the house had pulled him across it. His hand had touched the mirror, and now everything was different. His heart raced, his breath shallow and erratic, as his body trembled with the realization that nothing in this house was what it seemed. The walls pressed in on him, their dark energy growing stronger with every passing second. He could feel the house's hunger, its insatiable thirst for something, someone to be consumed. And now it was clear. He was that someone. He stumbled backward, his vision blurry, his head throbbing. The mirror was gone, its surface now a dark void, stretching out in front of him like an abyss. The whispers had stopped, but a heavy silence filled the air, thick with dread. It was as if the house was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the next move, to unravel whatever had been set into motion. But Lucas was no longer alone. His mind felt clouded, as if a fog had descended over his thoughts. He couldn't trust his senses. He couldn't trust anything. The world around him shifted again. The walls, once stable and unmoving, began to pulse with a rhythmic beat, slow like the beating of a heart. He could hear it in his chest too, matching the wall's tempo. The very house itself was breathing, moving with an unnatural life. The shadows grew deeper, stretching across the floors and walls like hands reaching toward him, clawing at the air. He pressed his back against the wall, trying to steady his thoughts. But the paranoia, that gnawing feeling of being watched, began to grow unbearable. The house wasn't just observing him, it was controlling his mind, twisting his thoughts. He could feel it now, crawling beneath his skin. No. He shook his head. trying to clear the disorienting fog that clouded his senses. He was alone. No one was here. He was just tired, exhausted. The house had gotten into his head, nothing more. But then he heard it, a faint, unmistakable sound. Footsteps. Someone was walking through the hall, the floorboards creaking underfoot. Lucas's eyes snapped wide open, his breath hitching in his chest, his pulse surged. He wasn't imagining it this time. There was someone else in the house with him. "Hello?" he called out hoarsely, his voice thin in the air. The footsteps paused, and then they continued, but they were much closer now. The soft, echoing sound grew louder until it seemed to be right beside him. His heart hammered in his throat. His feet felt like they were rooted to the ground. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The footsteps came closer, slow, deliberate, each creak of the floor sending waves of terror through his body. But when Lucas finally mustered the courage to turn around, there was no one there. No one at all. He swore under his breath, his hands shaking as he ran them through his hair. He was losing it. He had to be. The house had driven him mad. The whispers, the reflections, Evelyn's face, they were all in his mind. The walls began to groan, the air thickening with every passing second. It wasn't just paranoia anymore, it was a certainty. The house was alive. The house knew him. It had always known him, had been watching him long before he had set foot inside. The house was not just a structure, it was a sentient force, something that could manipulate his thoughts, bend his reality, make him question everything. Lucas staggered forward, the weight of his fear pressing down on him. The shadows twisted, and suddenly the room felt smaller, suffocating, as though the walls were closing in on him. His heart pounded louder now, outpacing the heartbeat of the house itself. He couldn't escape this. He couldn't leave. The house had already claimed him, just as it had claimed Evelyn. He pushed forward, blindly stumbling down the hallway, desperate to find a way out, but the path ahead shifted before his eyes, the walls bending like wet paper. The doorways changed direction, leading him into rooms he didn't recognize. The house was warping, moving, trapping him in a maze of shifting corridors. Suddenly the footsteps returned. They were closer now, too close. The sound of shoes dragging across the floor echoed in the hall following him. He could hear the breath, low and labored, right behind him. The walls seemed to ripple with a twisted energy, and the shadows lengthened unnaturally. "Who's there?" Lucas shouted, his voice trembling, but the only response was the steady, agonizing creak of the floorboards behind him. He spun around, but there was no one, only the stretching shadows, the sickly distortion of the walls. His mind was playing tricks on him. Or was it? Was this the house-bending reality, making him see things that weren't really there? "Please," he whispered to the dark. "Please, I need to get out." The house seemed to respond to his plea. The shadows coiled tighter around him, and for a brief moment everything stood still, silent. But then, with a sickening lurch, the floor beneath him shifted. The walls snapped into place, and the door behind him slammed shut with such force that it rattled his bones. The hallway was gone, replaced by a familiar room. The one with the mirror. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. His heart stopped. He hadn't remembered how he'd arrived back here. He hadn't consciously made the decision to turn around and enter this room again. But now, it was here. He was standing in front of it. The mirror. He could feel his mind unraveling. His reflection stared back at him, but it wasn't his face anymore. It was Evelyn's face. Her eyes were wide, full of the same terror that had once consumed her. The same fear, the same madness that had overtaken her was now beginning to creep into his own soul. And then the reflection smiled, not in the same desperate, pleading way. No, this smile was different. It was slow, deliberate and chilling. It was the smile of someone who had finally surrendered to the house's will. Evelyn had become a part of the house, and now it was pulling him in. "Come closer," the reflection whispered. And just like that, the walls around him began to close in, and the house, no, the thing in the house, became his only reality. The air in the house was thick, heavy, as though it had been holding its breath for years. Lucas stood frozen, his eyes locked on the mirror, his reflection twisted into Evelyn's tortured face, smiling that slow, knowing smile. His pulse quickened, his thoughts tangled in a web of fear and confusion. He couldn't move, couldn't look away. The house seemed to press in around him, its walls closing in, the whispers swirling through the air like a maddening storm. And then, without warning, the reflection in the mirror shifted. Evelyn's face was gone, replaced by the dim, dark outline of something behind him. Lucas's heart pounded harder as the shadow grew sharper, its form now solidifying into something unmistakably real. It wasn't a reflection, it was a window. The walls trembled as the shadow behind him expanded, filling the space around him. The mirror wasn't just showing him a part of the house, it was revealing a hidden reality, a place that had been buried beneath the layers of the house's warped walls. Without thinking, Lucas took a step forward, his hand trembling as it reached toward the glass. The surface of the mirror shimmered under his touch, and in that moment, the world around him seemed to shift. The floor beneath him groaned as if the house was realigning itself, responding to his movement, to his curiosity. A low hum began to vibrate in his chest, matching the rhythm of his pounding heart. The air grew colder as the reflection in the mirror rippled, revealing a door behind the shadow. The door was old, its wood splintered and scarred, but it beckoned. To him, "Open me." The whispers grew louder again, and Lucas could hear them now, not just in his mind, but through the walls, pressing into his ears with an urgency he couldn't ignore. "Go. Find it. The truth is behind the door." The voice sounded familiar now, as though it were not just the house's hunger speaking to him, but something deeper, something ancient. He couldn't stop himself. He didn't want to, not anymore. Everything he had seen, the shifting walls, the endless shadows, Evelyn's desperate face in the mirror, had led him here. The house wanted him to find the truth, to see it. And there was no turning back. Lucas reached out, his fingers brushing against the cold surface of the mirror. As soon as his skin touched the glass, it felt like the world split in two. His hand sank through the mirror's surface as though the glass had turned to liquid. His entire body followed, drawn into the reflection like an insect trapped in a spider's web. The air around him shifted. The mirror's frame dissolved, leaving him in complete darkness. His feet hit solid ground, but it wasn't the room he had been standing in. The house had changed again. He was somewhere else now. The room was smaller, suffocatingly so, with stone walls that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The temperature had dropped sharply, and the air was thick with dust, every breath tasting heavy and stale. The ground beneath him was uneven, as if the very earth here had settled in a way that didn't quite make sense. The shadows were darker, more oppressive, and they seemed to move on their own, stretching and receding with an almost rhythmic pulse. Lucas stumbled forward, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The room felt ancient, a place lost in time, an unmarked, forgotten space deep within the house's depths. The only light was a dim, flickering lantern in the corner of the room, casting long, crooked shadows against the walls. And there, in the center of the room, was the thing that the house had been pulling him toward, the door. It stood at the far end of the room, its surface covered in dark stains that looked too much like old blood. The door was warped and uneven, its edges curling and splintering. But there was something undeniably magnetic about it, something that, when called to him, beckoned him closer. His heart hammered in his chest. He could feel the house's energy gathering around him, tightening like a noose. This was the moment. The truth was on the other side of that door. You must go through. The whispers urged. It will show you everything. With no choice left, Lucas walked toward the door. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the house pressing down on him with a terrifying intensity. The door loomed closer now, its jagged surface seeming to twist with the movement of the shadows. He reached for the handle, his hand trembling. The door creaked open with a sound like breaking bone, and Lucas stepped into the space beyond. What he saw made his stomach churn, a knot of cold terror wrapping around his chest. The room he had entered was not a room at all. It was a vast, empty void, a chasm of darkness stretching endlessly in all directions. But within the dark, there was something else. At the very center of the void, suspended in mid-air, was a floating stone altar. It was surrounded by symbols, ancient and unfamiliar, glowing faintly in the shadows. The same symbols Lucas had seen etched into the walls of the house. Symbols that had drawn him in, pulling him deeper into this nightmare. But there was more. On the altar, illuminated by a single flickering light, was an object that made his blood run cold. A mirror. The mirror was cracked, jagged lines running across its surface, but in its reflection, Lucas could see something that shouldn't have been possible. Evelyn. Her face was twisted in agony, her mouth open in a silent scream. But it wasn't just her reflection. It was as if she was trapped inside the mirror, reaching out, her fingers pressing against the glass, desperate to escape. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, Lucas saw not just the terror, but recognition. In her gaze, she had seen him, just as he had seen her. The mirror pulsed with an unsettling energy, the glass rippling like water. The whispers grew louder now, their voices a maddening chorus. She's waiting. You're the last. The final sacrifice, the altar, the mirror, the symbols. It all made sense now. The house was alive. It was not just a place, but a living entity. A parasite that fed on fear, on souls. Evelyn had found the truth. She had discovered what lay beneath, and now she was trapped inside this mirror, just as Lucas would be. He could feel the house pulling at him again, this time with an undeniable force. It wanted him to take the next step, to become a part of it, to give in. And as Lucas reached toward the mirror, his reflection once again twisted into Evelyn's tortured face. He realized with cold clarity, the house had been waiting for him all along. This was the final stage, the moment it had been, leading him toward, and there was no escape. The mirror pulsed like a living thing, its surface rippling in the dim light as Evelyn's tortured face stared back at Lucas, her eyes wide with fear and desperation. He felt the pull, the undeniable magnetic force of the house as it surrounded him, consuming his thoughts and pulling him closer to the altar. The whispers had become a deafening roar, the voices now mingling with his own pounding heartbeat. She's waiting. You must join her. He took a hesitant step forward, his feet moving, as if they weren't his own, drawn toward the mirror like a moth to a flame. His body felt heavy, sluggish, as though the house itself was sucking the life out of him, slowly but surely. Each step felt like it carried him deeper into a web of darkness, a trap set long before he ever set foot in this house. The whispers continued to swirl around him, each word wrapping itself tighter around his mind, feeding on his terror. It knows you, they said. You are one of us now. He could feel the walls closing in, the very air around him thickening with a suffocating pressure. The space around him was becoming smaller, more claustrophobic, the shadows growing darker and more oppressive. The house was alive and it was hungry, and in that hunger, it wasn't just the house that was pulling him in. It was Evelyn. Her eyes, still locked with his in the mirror, seemed to plead with him. She was trapped, bound to the house, consumed by it. She had been swallowed whole, just as he would be, unless he made a choice that felt less like A decision, and more like an inevitability. He reached out, his hand trembling toward the mirror. The moment his fingers brushed against the cracked glass, an electric shock shot through his body. It felt like the very life was being siphoned from him, like he was being pulled through the mirror, his soul ripped from his body. And then, with a sickening lurch, the house's hunger took hold of him completely. The world around him tilted, and for a moment there was nothing but darkness. The ground disappeared beneath his feet, and the air became thick, heavy with a suffocating cold. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His body felt frozen in place, suspended in nothingness. Then slowly, the darkness receded, and Lucas found himself standing in the very place he had feared most, the heart of the house. The altar was gone, replaced by a vast, empty room. The walls were cracked and crumbling, covered in layers of dust, but they pulsed with a dark energy that made his skin crawl. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Evelyn. Her once alive face was now a ghastly reflection of the woman she had been. Her skin was pale, stretched tight over the bones, and her eyes, those wide, terrified eyes, were now hollow, devoid of all light. She had become a part of the house. Her essence had been absorbed, twisted into the very fabric of the walls, and now she was nothing but a hollow shell, a prisoner of the house's insatiable hunger. "Welcome home," the voice whispered in his mind. Lucas could no longer tell if it was the house speaking or if it was Evelyn, her soul lost in the walls, trying to warn him. He reached out toward her, his hand shaking. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What happened? What did you find here?" Her hollow eyes locked onto his, and for a moment there was a flicker of recognition, but it was fleeting. A sudden, sharp crack filled the room, and Evelyn's form seemed to ripple like the surface of the mirror itself. Her features twisted, contorted, as though the house itself was reshaping her, breaking her into pieces. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if it was coming from miles away. "It doesn't let anyone leave. It never lets anyone leave." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. The walls were closing in again, and the air felt heavier, suffocating him. The house was alive, and it was hungry. It wanted him. He could feel its hunger growing stronger, clawing at his mind, pulling him deeper into its grasp. "You have to fight it," he whispered, his voice ragged, his throat tight with fear. "I'm not like you. I won't let it take me." But as soon as the words left his mouth, the house responded. The ground beneath him shifted, and the floorboards began to groan and crack. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a life of their own. The dark energy that had once been subtle was now overwhelming, pressing down on him from all sides, suffocating him. His vision blurred as the shadows grew thicker, more alive. The whispers became a cacophony, a maddening rush of voices, all crying out in agony and hunger. They were not just the voices of the house. They were the voices of those who had come before him, those who had been consumed by the house's relentless hunger. And then, with a sudden rush of motion, the walls closed in completely. The house was devouring him. In that moment, he realized with cold certainty that the house did not just want his body. It wanted his soul. It wanted everything that made him him, his memories, his thoughts, his essence. It wanted to consume him just as it had consumed Evelyn, just as it had consumed everyone before them. And there was no escape. The last thing Lucas saw was Evelyn's face, her hollow eyes now wide with horror, as the darkness swallowed him whole. The darkness surrounded him completely now. It wasn't just the shadows that closed in, but the suffocating weight of the house itself. Lucas could feel its presence pressing against his chest, suffusing every inch of the room, every corner, with an overwhelming pressure that drained him of all resistance. The whispers, the voices of countless souls lost to the house, filled his mind, their cries for escape mingling with his own racing heartbeat. They had all become part of the house, trapped in its walls, its hunger, its endless, insatiable craving. Lucas felt himself falling deeper into the dark, his body fading into nothingness, his mind dissolving into a fog of terror. His thoughts, his memories, all began to slip away, as though they were being consumed by the very air around him. He tried to scream, but no sound came. He tried to move, to escape, but his limbs were frozen in place as if the house itself had a firm grip on him, holding him in a place where time and space no longer mattered. The cold air grew colder. His vision blurred, and then there was a shift, a sudden jarring change that rattled him from the inside out. The darkness began to crack, the silence rupturing, and Lucas was pulled back into the depths of the house once more. The air grew thick with an overwhelming force that was neither cruel nor kind, but controlling. He could feel the house watching him, not with eyes, but with something much more ancient, much more sinister. He was no longer in control of his own mind, his own body. The final choice, the voice whispered, echoing through the void. It was a familiar voice, but twisted, foreign now. It had come from within him, from the house, from everything that had come before him and everything that would follow. Lucas's breath came in short, shallow gasps as he tried to focus on the words. The final choice, he had no choice at all. He had already made it the moment he entered the Whisper House, the moment he allowed the house to consume him, just as it had consumed Evelyn and countless others before him. But then someone spoke. Again, "You are not alone." It was Evelyn. But this time, her voice was clear, resonating with a finality that sent chills down his spine. "You are not the first to stand here. You are not the first to fall into this house's trap." He felt his mind whirl as her voice echoed around him. "You can still choose. There is always a choice." Lucas's heart beat harder in his chest. A bitter realization sank into his bones. He wasn't completely lost yet. He still had a shred of control. The house had tried to pull him into its endless abyss, to devour his soul completely, but Evelyn was trying to give him a chance. She had fought it once, and now she was offering him the same chance. The choice, but what was that choice? The shadows around him swirled, warping into shapes that were neither human nor beast. They were the lost souls of the house, the ones who had been consumed long ago, and they surrounded him now, whispering, urging, pleading. They were lost. They were already part of the house, prisoners of its endless hunger. "You must choose," Evelyn's voice repeated. "Stay and become a part of the house, or let it consume you and die." Lucas's breath caught in his throat. His thoughts swirled in a frantic spiral. Stay. How could he stay? The house wanted his soul, wanted his memories, his essence. If he stayed, he would be another prisoner in the walls of the Whisper House, another whisper lost in the endless corridors of the dark, but die. There was no escape. The house had already claimed him. There was no going back, no leaving, no way to wake up from this nightmare. It would never let him go. Yet, as his thoughts collided in a maelstrom of fear and desperation, something deep inside him began to change. A spark of defiance, buried beneath the weight of the house's hunger, flared up within him. It wasn't death he feared. It was becoming a part of the house, losing himself completely. That was what had happened to Evelyn. That was what the house wanted to do to him. Lucas stepped forward, though his legs felt like they could give way beneath him. The darkness in the room thickened, trying to pull him back, but he resisted, his breath coming harder, faster. Evelyn's voice rang in his ears once more. "You can choose to fight. You can choose to escape." And with that final word, Lucas realized that the true choice was not between staying or dying. It was between fighting or succumbing. The house wanted to trap him. The house wanted to twist him into something it could consume forever. But Lucas, who could fight, he could resist. In one final act of defiance, he focused all of his willpower, every ounce of his being, into one single thought. He wouldn't let it take him. He wouldn't let it have the last piece of him. With a force that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house, Lucas willed the house to release him. The walls screamed, the shadows shrieked, the house fought back. But Lucas held his ground. He focused on the one thing he had left, his humanity, his will. The spark inside him that refused to be consumed. And then, with a blinding flash of light, the house shrieked, a sound so loud and all-consuming that it filled his mind with terror. But then, it stopped. The light faded. The pressure lifted. And Lucas found himself standing in an empty room. The house was gone. The shadows, the whispers, the hunger, they were all gone. Lucas was alone. Alone, but free. The walls that had once closed in on him, trapping him in an endless nightmare, were gone, leaving nothing but a dark, silent void. He was standing at the edge of nothingness, at the precipice of something much larger than the house, something beyond the darkness. He had made his choice. He had fought, and he had won. But the victory came at a cost. Evelyn's face, the last trace of her, lingered in his mind. She had helped him escape, but now she was lost, trapped forever in the house she had once called home. And though Lucas was free, he could not forget. He would carry the weight of the house's hunger with him forever. He had escaped the house, but it had never truly let